welcome back. Now we're going to do chapter 2. Are you ready? All right, let's see what their first case might be. This chapter is called Samson. Wow! Ingo Walsick striped cat padded across the kitchen. He stretched lazily and rubbed against the doorframe to ease the aches and pains still left from his last battle. In the alley behind the house, evening shadows were deepening to dark purple. The cat's whiskers quivered. He shifted the scents drifting in through the screen door. Rob! He looked back at the elderly woman. Just a minute, Samson. She placed the last saucer in the dish drain, then dried her hands on the kitchen towel. She picked up her cane and went to the door. The cat The cat twined around her leg. "We're a pair, aren't we, Samson?" she asked. "Now don't push us both over. You know I'm going to let you out. I always do, don't I?" He waited silently. Then he slid through the crack before the door completely opened as usual. Mrs. Walsick chuckled. "Guess I'll not hear from you until morning." She closed the screen door and latched it. "Better get yourself home early, though," she called to the departing cat. "The missions committee meets tomorrow morning, and I want to get there early to set up my display. You hear me, Samson?" He stopped on the first step. He arched his back and limbered his muscles some more. "Lot you care about me," she scolded frowningly. "Just get yourself home safely." She turned away from the door, murmuring, "Now where did I put that list?" Samson meowed, sensing by her tone that she was no longer talking to him. Then he stalked down to the backyard. At the fence, he crouched for a minute, his tail lashing. The leap to the top cost him some effort, more than in the past it had. On the other side, he used the garbage can, to step down into the alley. He spent the next half hour tracing the scent of each intruder who had dared enter the alley. When the alley passed inspection, he stepped out into the street. He stood defiantly in the glow of the street light. His hair rose slightly along his back. Then he lifted his head and howled at the night. He waited, ready to defend his territory, but the night remained silent. Satisfied, he turned left and padded down the block. The habits of years governed his route. At the first intersection, he crossed the street. He dodged the traffic with ease of long experience. Only a battered dark green van with muddy license plates had to swerve to avoid hitting him. The driver leaned out of the window and shouted angrily. Samson stopped just long enough to give him a steady stare. Then he continued on his route. When he reached the Connollys' house, he scratched at the back door. The Connollys usually had a tidbit left from dinner that they saved just for Samson. Tonight was no exception. The door opened and Mark Connolly appeared. Okay, there is the truck. Almost hitting Samson. The boy wore pajamas, his dark hair still wet from the shower. "Okay, Samson, come and get it." He dangled a big piece of shrimp for the cat. Samson took it gently in his jaws and lay down to bat it around. Mark sat down on the step and watched until the cat finally finished the shrimp. Samson rubbed his nose against Mark's pajamas. "Can't give you any more, old boy," Mark said. "Mrs. Walsack's orders." He stroked the cat's thick back. You're getting too fat as it is. Scavenging all across town is beginning to tell on you. Some young cat's going to take you out some day. You'd better watch it, you hear?" Samson growled and stalked away, leaving the boy on the doorstep. As usual, he crossed below an open window. Then he lifted his head and let a high, wavering cry escape from his throat. A startled face appeared at the window, braces gleaming in an open mouth. "Get out of here, Samson!" Hori's shout was followed by 2 loud sneezes. Then the window slammed down and the face disappeared. Samson rubbed softly. The sound deepened into a satisfied purr. He cut across the Abbey Street Cemetery and perched on a large flat gravel gravestone. Paw cleaning took about 10 minutes. Then he crouched, ears alert, anticipating his next move. At 9:45, right on schedule, he headed for the tailor's house. He eased through the hedge and covered the side yard in a series of dashes from shadow to shadow, belly almost to the grass. Near the back fence he stopped, hesitating. 2 unfamiliar shadows darkened the moonlit grass. Samson wished his tail and crouched lower. "Think we put enough in?" a man's voice whispered. "It's enough." The other voice was lower, gruffer. Samson had a vague memory of a hoarse shout from the van. He flattened himself on the grass, ears back. "When that pug gobbles his meal," the second voice continued, "it'll be his last for a while. He will bring a good price in any market. Come on, while we're waiting, we'll check out the next street." Samson waited until the man noises faded. The 2 figures moved through the shrubbery and onto the sidewalk. Then the men, one taller than the other, one taller than the other, slipped into the darkened van. The van moved quietly down the street. Satisfied that the danger was past, Samson continued on to the tailor's house. The fancy doghouse in the backyard was empty, and the overflowing food dish was unattended. Samson ignored the food, lay down to wait. After a while, the back door opened, and the light from the kitchen poured into the yard. Blackenridge Prince the Third swaggered down the steps across the grass. "Night-night, Blackie," called Mrs. Taylor as she shut the door. The deep-jowled pug didn't look back. He trotted toward the food. I don't know if you know, but a pug is a breed of dog. Okay? Samson waited until the pug was nose deep in his bowl. Moving silently on the pads of his paws, he approached from the rear. He stopped a few inches from the dog and extended his claws, admiring their sharpness and length. Then he swiped the claw across the dog's exposed flank. The pug yanked his nose out of the dish. He whipped around, teeth bared. When he found himself nose to nose with Samson, he cringed. Samson curled his lip in a silent snarl. The pug immediately gave way and scrambled for the back door, yelping all the way. The door opened quickly to admit him. "Samson!" screeched Mrs. Taylor from the doorway. "Don't you eat all that food? I left enough for both of you. For shame!" Mr. Taylor stood behind her, looking out. "Why do you let that cat bully you is beyond me," he said. "He's blackmailing you, pure and simple." Well, I try to keep the peace with Samson, Mrs. Taylor replied. She picked up the shivering dog. The cat gives him a case of the nerves. Huh, Mr. Taylor grunted. He turned back to the kitchen. It's more a case of who's the cat and who's the dog. I think those two have their skins switched. Blackie's a show dog. He's worth hundreds of dollars, Mrs. Taylor said. He's not a fighter. Not now, he isn't. Only pug I've ever seen that couldn't take care of himself. Mr. Taylor shook his head in disgust. Now, in full possession of the doghouse, Samson ate neatly and daintily. Then, when he finished, he curled up inside. In a few minutes, he was fast asleep. 30 minutes later, the pug ventured outside again. Samson still asleep. The dog slunk, tail between his legs, to the porch. A green van cruised back along the darkened street. At the corner, the headlights dimmed and the engine stopped. The van coasted to a stop near the back fence. This time the men didn't talk. They moved silently toward the doghouse. One quick kick shoved the food dish out of the way. Another equally swift movement brought a sack down over the sleeping form in the doghouse. Quickly, the men carried the sack back to the van, tossed it into the back, and started the engine. It purred quietly. At the corner, the men switched on the headlights and gunned the engine. Then the sudden noise alerted the pug. He barked twice, then got up and trotted across the backyard. He hurried to the dish and began to gobble the remaining food. When he was finished, he yawned heavily. He entered the doghouse, sniffed out his violated territory, turned around twice, and lay down. In a few minutes, he was sleeping soundly. So violated territory, that means because Samson was in there and he shouldn't have been. So that's the dog's territory. Okay, a territory is a part that you own or is belonging to you. And so the dog went in and sniffed around, sniffing Samson was there. And then he turned around a few times because that's what animals do. And he laid down. Okay? All right, so I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.